Hello viewers, tonight I am going to be reading another article. This one once again has to do with race. This is about blackface, which is another subject which I'm going to review and in a video response to Yoko Ishii. But that will be later. She is the Japanese patriot I have talked about before. She defended blackface. She thinketh it to be a perfectly legitimate form of comedy that is not racist in any sense, in her opinion. But anyhow, we have this article, Japan's Blackface Problem, the country's bizarre, troubled relationship with race. For those of you who have not seen blackface before, this is indeed blackface. This goeth back to the history of minstrel shows in the United States and the portrayal of Afro people for the purpose of comedy. I wonder, one of these dictionaries has this word, I am sure. But basically it was a show where maybe I'm spelling it wrong, I really do not know. I thought one of these dictionaries had it. Minstrel. I'm sure, I am spelling it wrong, aren't I? I am. A highly conventionalized theatrical entertainment of the 19th century and early 20th centuries, usually performance by whites in blackface and featuring comic dialogue, songs and dances based on stereotypes of blacks. Which is basically what this is. They feel the need to do it. Even in Japan, they have a history of, or at least in Japan, the knowledge of who slaves were was known even when the Portuguese and Spanish and other groups had brought slaves to that country. So, Japanese history, the subject of Afro people being subjected to slavery is not something that is unknown. Members of the popular Japanese girl group Momoro or Momoiro Clover Z in blackface alongside an older band, Rats and Star. Is that so? Rats and Star. But how absolutely ridiculous, truth be told. When Japanese actor Koichi Yamadera appeared on the popular variety show Monomani Battle in 2009 to perform the classic What a Wonderful World, it was likely meant as a tribute to the American jazz tradition that still has a small dedicated following in Japan. Yamadera, in apparent affection for the jazz master Louis Armstrong, who popularized the song, did something that would have elicited gasps in the United States, but only raised polite applause from his totally unfazed Japanese audience. He put on full unironic blackface. Now this is in no wise a tribute or something done out of reverence or respect Japanese people are not culturally or racially inept to the degree that this need to continue. There are still people in Japan defending it, even though real Afro people have said that they do not appreciate it. Nonetheless, it continues. It continueth. And so, the people who do it continue to do it. They do it for the audiences because the audience like to see blackface. They like to see a minstrel show, just like the Old South. Over there in Japan, the Ainu are subjugated, or at least they're discriminated against. Okinawans are discriminated against. Koreans are discriminated against. And Afro people are discriminated against. Racism and bigotry is in no wise something that is foreign to Japan. Japan is not, as we reviewed in a previous video, a homogeneous country. Many people have told Japanese people this is not some type of scandal that is unique to this group. This has happened before. And Japanese individuals, men and women, continue to paint their faces brown and black. When people see it, they laugh. Because the very appearance of an Afro person is funny to them. Imagine being an individual, an Afro person, and your very appearance bringeth laughs from Japanese people. Because after all, Afro people, the stereotype is they are either funny, which is good, or they're serious and angry, which is a very bad thing. Or at least this is how the conventional stereotypes are. And of course, the idea of debasing oneself and painting the face brown, this holdeth a different context than the geisha who painteth her face white, because after all, the traditional understanding of pale skin in Japanese culture is that pale skin is beautiful and that brown skin is not. So many Afro people have said this is not something that they appreciate. If they know enough about Louis Armstrong and know what type of discrimination, what type of culture was present in the United States, they have to know something about United States history. And so that is very interesting, to respect Louis Armstrong, to basically do I suppose jazz rendition of one of his songs, and then engage in the very behavior that had plagued the Afro-American community, with all manner of stereotypes, with all manner of just blatant mockery of Afro people. It is quite something. And it continueth to happen even today. So he put on full unironic blackface. It was not just him. Japanese singers, in imitating Afro-American performers, have done this often. Bay McNeil, a black American writer who hath lived in Japan for a decade, told me he found the blackface appalling, but didn't think it was worth wasting too much time on in a country he loveth, despite suffering from routine racism. And these people are quite different than me because I speak my mind, but some people think, well, there is no reason really to make any complaints. Which, truth be told, in a sense, being a traveler, it maketh some sense to do that, but even so, Americans have been there for a very long time. Ever since World War II, there have been all types of tourists ever since. Ever since Japan had opened up after World War II, after they had lost the war, there has been such an American presence that, truth be told, people should start speaking in a very mature manner to these individuals who are Japanese, who expect others to respect their culture, and they have no respect for different races and ethnicities. And the truth is, the reason people like that individual who suffer from routine racism should speak is because even before them, and even individuals who are not Afro, Koreans, as well as Ainu people, Japan has so many problems involving bigotry, involving how they treat their minority groups. And they will not stop unless people speak and continue to speak. People are so very afraid. I can't say anything to these people because this is a homogenous country. They have never seen an Afro person before. No. In order to understand one another, we have to communicate. Whether we engage in argumentation or whatnot, contention is not necessarily a bad thing. In some of my videos involving the Christian community, I say the same thing. There are so many people who get in weird, petty disputes, and oftentimes I do say this. I say contention, argument is not such a bad thing. Sometimes it is needed in order for us to understand one another. And that is true for people of different ethnicities, religions, races, what have one. It is just so. If no one speaketh, then frankly, there will be a lack of understanding. But McNeil lost his patience last month when members of a popular mainstream Japanese group posed for the promotional photo that appeareth at the top of this page. In it, the members of girl band Moiro, Clover Z, grin in full blackface alongside Old Kroner's Rats and Star, who have been performing in paint since the 1980s. The two bands were set to appear together on Fuji TV, a major network. Now, this article was written, I believe, in 2015. These people have been doing this, these older people have been doing this since the oh goodness, I'm trying to use a new word. I always try to use new words. This is also a word study channel. No, this has so many dictionaries in it. That has at least 10 or if not 12 or so dictionaries in it, but it does not have Scythian. Scythian, which is the word I want to use, same as Sith for sense. Yes. These individuals, these older men, have been doing this since the 1980s, which is quite... These people, they engage in American culture. And even if one does not know what is so funny about this, would it be as funny if they did not have the brown paint upon their faces? I do not think they lack that degree of self-awareness people want it. I think that they know that this cause of some degree of offense. However, the audience want to see this, and so they continue to do it. And so they have to know something of Afro-American culture. Anyone who knows anything about Afro-American culture already knows that there is a certain degree of, from movies or whatnot, people know. You watch movies like Rush Hour with Chris Tucker or whoever else, Afro people, though they are presented as funny even in movies and whatnot, most people already know that Afro people, at least Afro-American culture, there's a certain degree of self-respect involved in it that maketh itself apparent. And this is not something that Afro people appreciate. I think that they all know that, but I think especially these men who've been doing this particular minstrel show for so very long, these particular minstrel shows that they have been doing, they have to know. They have been doing this since the 1980s. There are Afro people in Japan, people who have lived there for many years. They continue to do it because this is good for business. It is a profession for them, and so they do take advantage of it. Anyhow, since the 1980s, how incredible. So this person lost his patience, and in my opinion, I think that, what was that verse in Proverbs? Open rebuke is better than secret love. In other words, truth be told, if a person feeleth that they needeth to provide, that they need to provide correction or rebuke, they should do so. Because when one holdeth their rebuke, their anger, so to speak, or rather one will become angry because they did not speak about a cultural matter that someone is ignorant about. And someone may say, oh, that will cause contention. I am in Japan. I will adopt their passive culture. This culture in Japan where you have to be very, very polite. Oh, I am polite. I will not bring that up. It will cause trouble. I do not want to cause trouble. I think sometimes it is a good thing to cause trouble. When one seeth something that offendeth, that offendeth one so much that they feel that they need to speak about it, they should. If that man was in America, in all likelihood he would say something. However, he feeleth that he hath to conduct himself by the standard of Japanese culture instead of expressing himself honestly. Now what this does is it will cause him or other individuals to be very angry. And Japanese people will see that. And they will say, oh, look at him. Angry black man. Oh, the stereotypes are true. This, and I will say this, Japanese social culture is not so very good. This is not something that should be adopted. Japanese social culture is stunted. There are certain things that Japanese people, for the most part, seem to do very well, or that the Japanese nation is known for, working with great efficiency and so forth. But in regard to their social culture, they have much to learn from many other social groups, even in Asia. a great many Japanese individuals have a great deal to learn. And I think a person should not simply hold their tongue and not speak their mind in regard to a matter like this, because what it end up doing is causing even more strife, because by not saying something, eventually at some point one could see something such as this, and then one will say something, and when one saith it, it will come across as being quite angry. And the Japanese people who the said individual, this person in question, may be dealing with may recognize that, and they will think, we should not engage or deal with Afro people because they are angry and unreasonable. And this is a very sad truth, but it could be avoided if Afro people simply decided to speak their minds and not try to conform themselves to Japanese culture. I do not think anyone needeth to conform themselves to the culture of any nation that they take residence into, so to speak. If you are working in the nation, if you are paying taxes, if you are buying products, you should behave naturally. Because not expressing yourself truly, in my opinion, it will cause more problems. It will cause more problems. So this was the last straw, I suppose. He decided to hold his tongue, and it turned out that was quite stupid, in my opinion. It always is. I haven't even read all of this, but I believe it is stupid to do what he did. If you recognize something, you should speak about it. That is my opinion. Something like this, if it is biased, if it is bigoted, one should speak openly about it. If one doth not do so, then nothing will change. Who have been performing in paint since the 80s? Okay, I've read that. If I highlight it, I can know where I was, because I'm interrupting this video with commentary. I don't read it straight through. Oh goodness, that isn't working. No. Okay, that was... Yeah, my internet is off. I'm so sorry for that, because I'm reading this as a PDF. Okay, it was Black History Month, and McNeil had enough. He was not going to let prominent young pop stars pass what he called the baton of ignorance to Japan's next generation on national television. He organized a petition on change.org to get Fuji TV to drop the segment. Good. You know, this is... Nothing will change unless people speak their minds. Nothing will change. And frankly, at the very least, people should do that. Combined with an avalanche of tweets hashtagged Stop Blackface Japan, it worked. The show Music Fair aired on March the 7th without the blackface performance. But as McNeil knows all too well, the episode was only part of a much larger problem with race in Japan. A problem that cannot be quickly fixed with a petition. To Americans, indeed most people, it is pretty obvious that blackface is extremely racist. How could the Japanese, as well educated as they often are, tolerate this practice? The answer goes way beyond mere ignorance of blackface's ugly history to a national belief in Japan's ethnic purity that leaveth the country incapable of dealing with its race issues, because Shinto nationalistic understandings were... It is believed that the Yamato race in Japan, the sort of pure-blooded Yamato people, are superior to any other ethnic and racial group in Japan. That is the understanding. And so, that is a belief that people of other races are inferior. And the idea that was held by World War II Japan was that the Japanese Empire would eventually conquer the whole world and spread the worship of the holy Japanese emperor, who is descended from Amaterasu, the sun goddess. This is not something that is a joke. They believe this. Now, this is not the case for every Japanese person, but it is for a lot of the so-called Japanese patriots. They really hold on to that World War II and even feudal ideology. Japan's problem of racism is well established. A 2005 report by a UN special rapporteur described profound racism in the country, much of it aired at people from former Japanese colonial holdings in China and Korea. The idea is that once the people have been colonized, they are, and even before these people were colonized, they were considered to be inferior. Chinese and Korean people were considered to be inferior. Filipino people were considered to be inferior. These were the ideas that were held and are still held today by some particular Japanese individuals. They did not plan to uplift those people. They were, at that point, they were under Japanese control, but they were considered to be inferior to them. So, the Japanese nation during World War II had engaged in warfare from a position of racial superiority, just as Germany had did. The Weltanschauung, that is to say, worldview of the Japanese people, is very similar to Nazi Germany. Indeed it was. Alright, in 2013, extremist nationalists led a series of anti-Korean protests. They threatened to flatten Tokyo's Koreatown and build a gas chamber in its place. How very Nazi-like, because Japan was the ally of Axis Germany. They were, as we've reviewed before, but this is a Wikipedia article, honorary Aryans was an expression used in Nazi Germany to describe formal or unofficial status of persons, including some... I did not know what that word means. And they were treated... they were basically treated as though they were Aryans. So this Japanese woman doing a review... What is a review? I did not know what a review, R-E-V-U-E, is. So that is a word that I'm going to look up really quickly. A theatrical production consisting typically of brief or loosely connected, often satirical skits, songs, and dances. Interesting. During a visit by the Hitler Jugend and Nazi officials, the prevalent explanation as to why the status of honorary Aryan was bestowed by the Nazis upon other non-Aryan race peoples is relatively vague, but was mostly explained that the services of those peoples were deemed valuable to the German economy or war effort, or simply for other purely political or propaganda reasons. But anyhow, there were many Japanese people who were very proud of that. So you have this individual saying they build a gas chamber in its place. Interesting. That is very very much a sort of Nazi idea, so to speak, or it seemeth as though it is something that Nazi Germany would do. So I mean, that is very interesting. Japan is one of the few democracies without hate speech laws. So little was done to stop this. Anti-racists staged counter-protest, counter-demos, and an extremist group has since been forced to pay compensation, but the national government has done stunningly little to prohibit racist hate speech, particularly given Japan's recent history of fascism. And there are many people in the Japanese government, in a sense, they are basically, for all intents and purposes, Nazis, in a very real sense. And they have a great deal of power in their country, and especially regarding their education system. And there is even more research to be done about that, and I will be doing such research later on in regard to more books, so to speak, and collecting quotations about this very interesting and very not often spoke about subject. The blackface thing is emblematic of a larger problem of Japanese politics and civil society, in which diversity is not recognized or cultivated or respected. And in regard to the hate speech laws, this is exactly why people should say things about race in Japan, and not act as though these people are innocent, homogenous individuals. Oh, the Japanese people are so very polite. I wouldn't dare say anything about their racial problems because they're just so innocent. They don't know much. Meanwhile, or rather, throughout very recent history, World War II, they subjugated just about all of the East Asian countries, and even went into Southeast Asia. So, wow, so innocent, so homogenous, such kind people. No, not at all. No hate speech laws. And I do not know if some of you have not. Some of you have an understanding of the sort of idea of an introvert, or people who hold their ideas in. And of course, I do not like these psychological terms, but there are certain individuals who hold their true emotions and feelings back, and at certain times they let their true opinions out. This is why I think people who can speak should speak. If they feel they have some pertinent education to share, I do believe that should occur. So some Afro people especially feel very ashamed to speak their mind on certain issues, especially in regard to intercultural contexts, because they think, oh, a person should not do that. I am in another country. I would not dare to talk about my experience as an Afro person. Incredible. Quite incredible. Okay, let me read. So, diversity is not respected, said Kyle Cleveland, associate professor of sociology at Temple University's Tokyo campus, who lectures on race. The skepticism of diversity is all the more surprising given that Japan is a center of global tourism and trade, where foreigners are a common sight and foreign culture is commonly consumed. To understand why this is, you need to understand the powerful role that ethnic homogeneity, the idea of Japan as a nation of one blood, plays in its national identity. However, we have to remember, in that idea of so-called homogeneity, and here we have one of the most least ethnically diverse countries on earth, more than 98% of the population are Japanese nationals, which doth not make much sense considering this. How is this claim, it's so little ethnic diversity? Alright, 98% Japanese nationals, but ethnic diversity existed even before this idea of Japanese homogeneity was sort of promoted by particular Japanese politicians and even Westerners. Japan is homogeneous. Alright, so sure, an Ainu is a Japanese national, an Okinawan is a Japanese national, but they are not treated as being of one blood. They are different. They are discriminated against, often, routinely. As well as individuals of Korean descent who just so happen to also be Japanese nationals, because these people have been marrying in with different families for a long time. This has been occurring for so very long. So this very statement, one of the least ethnically diverse countries on earth, I did not believe that, because even if you have 98% of the population being Japanese nationals, it doth not matter, because even within that group of Japanese nationals, you still have different ethnic groups, as well as different racial and physiologically different traits in different groups. So this idea of Japan being a homogeneous country, a country with not very much ethnic diversity, it has always been a travesty, in my opinion, and very much a lie. And I think that is basically proven by the fact that there are obviously different. I mean, it is just so obvious. Whether you're talking about Koreans, Ainu, Okinawans, or whatever other groups that I do not know that have been in that country and are still Japanese nationals, and are obviously different ethnic groups, because if they were not different ethnic groups, they would not be discriminated against on a daily basis. It is a small island. How much ethnic diversity does a person expect there to be? But anyhow, personally, I just think that this article is somewhat foolish in the way it is written, because it perpetuates that lie. It's the least ethnically diverse country on earth, which, no, it is not true. Just because they all look Asian does not mean that it is not ethnically diverse. Okay, just because Asian people have similar features, and to some extent, these very claims are racist. To some extent. Because things such as this are not taken into account. And you do not read articles where there is a good deal of honesty about the ethnic diversity of Japan. Japanese people tend to think of themselves as being a single ethnicity. But that is not true. Because I just mentioned to you 3 ethnic groups that are not Yamato Japanese. Whoever wrote this article he's not as educated as some of the other people I know. Anyhow, the internet is off right now. I'm having internet problems, so that is why I'm reading in the PDF format for this particular article. But anyhow, this sort of sense of a single ethnicity, but really in Shinto languages, it's called the Yamato race of Japanese people. Yamato is the sort of idea of the spirit of Japan. Whoever wrote this article is not really taking into account the Shinto ideology, which I do. Some people are afraid to really speak about it in some news publications, as far as I'm concerned, except, well, no, I haven't really seen many people at all talk about how Shinto nationalism plays a part in Japanese racism and bigotry. I mean, any ancestral worship religion, all of these ancestral worship religions do promote bigotry by their very definition. For one thing, ancestral religions do not. A person who practices an ancestral religion of ancestral worship will not consider their ancestors to at all be wrong in any sense, or if to have done any evil. That is sort of the idea. Alright. That sense of, okay, I get lost sometimes. So it's fed cultural norms that encourage insularity, for example, but it is not. But even in Japan as a country, even if one were to take away all of the foreigners out of Japan, there's still discrimination against Ainu, Okinawans, and there are still Japanese people, Korean people who've been there for a very long time, not to mention Chinese people, and people from other countries such as Filipino people. So even if one were, and there are roots, and so it is not a homogenous country because there are people who have differences, ethnically and racially. So the claim has always been stupid. It is so annoying to see this claim, oh, Japan is a homogenous country. It hath always been the excuse used to justify any bigotry or racism that occurreth in Japan, which is quite annoying. So Japan has a complicated relationship that can swing from fascination to bafflement to disdain, depending in part on where you are from, which is no excuse at all, to be entirely honest. Complicated. You know that people are speaking in an entirely different way about a particular group when they say it is complicated. Oh, it may seem simple, but it is complicated. No, it is not that complicated, because if one taketh a look at their religion, it promotes the destruction of the Ainu people. It saith, Yamato Japanese are to conquer Korea, Yamato Japanese are to conquer the Ainu, and all of the different groups in Japan and even outside of Japan. The whole religion of Shinto and the whole idea of imperial emperor worship, imperial Shinto, teacheth the same thing. The same things. So, many of the articles I read do not really express the truth. You have to read different books. You have to learn from different sources, because most of the information about Japan is very how should I say, it is lacking. It is lacking a great deal. Many of the articles are poorly written. Many of the people who write the articles do not have an adequate degree of education regarding the subject of Japanese culture. They simply do not. In general, Japan has a lot of admiration for Europe and more ambivalence toward the United States because of the wartime experience, said Cleveland. At the same time, they tend to view themselves as superior compared with other Asians because of that Yamato lineage, that Yamato blood. They believe that they are the descendants of the gods. So this quote can be mentioned out of context, and it is basically, there is no context for it, because they are not showing us the cultural reasons. The cultural reasons and the religious reasons are there, but this article is so poorly written. It's just, Japanese people just tend to like Europeans more. They like Europeans more because they consider themselves to be, or at least during World War II, the idea was promoted that they were the allies of Germany. And this was a great honor, that Germans were ideologically equal to Japanese people. And the United States was considered to be a country that had mongrels in it, that had people of every different race that were disdained, And Japanese people thought it was their destiny to conquer the whole world with their empire, alongside their ideological equals, the Germans. The Germans had a racist philosophy and religion. The Nazis, at least, they did, where they believed that the old Norse gods and spirits had their interests in mind, and they would be the Ubermen, and they would basically breed a race of superior people. And Japanese World War II culture promoted the same thing, and truth be told, had a much longer history of Shinto. There was an official a Japanese official a long time ago, in ancient times, who had went to the Chinese court, who went to the Chinese royalty, as far as I remember, the emperor himself, and had basically, or some ruler in China, and he'd basically say that Japan will rise like the rising sun, and basically, and this was during a time when Japan basically had very little power. He was basically saying Japan will rise and China will sort of recede, or something to that extent. And the Chinese, whoever this person was, whether he was a Chinese emperor or whatever type of ruler he was, people said that he was that Japanese man was very lucky that Chinese emperor basically had mercy on him and did not have him executed for his insolence, because he basically said Japan is going to rise. And this is the type of idea that many Japanese people had back then, and in World War II, and some Japanese patriots still have today. They believe Amaterasu, their goddess of the sun, is basically will lead them to excellence and victory in every single aspect, and that their blood is just holy and superior, and that they really are white people, even though they tan when they go in the sun. It doth not matter how many cosmetics the women use to whiten their skin. They are not European, and they never will be European, no matter how much so many of them want to be European. They are not. But they still have that culture of discriminating against other races, especially people of darker skin tones. As I said in my last video, that is a culture that predates the arrival of Europeans. It doth. Anyhow, historians have long examined how Japan's unique history could have shaped its complicated views about foreigners. In 1639, the country's ruling Tokugawa shogunate made the momentous decision to cut off Japan from the rest of the world, except for limited trade. It stayed that way for another 2 centuries. Ordinary Japanese were forbidden from traveling abroad. Foreigners became a source of endless fascination. But even with them isolating themselves, they still had different ethnic groups in that country. Ainu people are a different ethnic group. Okinawans are a different ethnic group. Now, they still had some degree of trade with different Asian countries. They still were receiving cultural influences from China. It was known that Kenshin Uesugi, a Japanese warlord, he, or at least, I do not know if it was the Shingon or whatever his name, one of them liked Chinese poetry or something of that sort. So there was still cultural exchange. So even amongst those Asian countries, they are different races. Chinese people are a different race. Koreans are a different race. Japanese people are a different race. Now all of those countries all have differing ideologies that are present in the minds of the individuals who live in those countries. However, Japanese nationalism was very strong, and it showed itself to be very, very, very an ideological force that sort of was the impetus for World War II. This idea that the Japanese people were descended from the gods, but not just any Japanese people, Yamato Japanese. Although the Ainu person has lived in Japan, and the Okinawan is living in Japan, they are all considered to be inferior people, to be people who are not truly Japanese. They are considered to be not descended from the gods, not descended from Amaterasu, and so they are considered to be inferior. And this is not a lie. This is historically true. Whoever wrote this article, obviously they did not know, or they did not want to share this information, because it is extremely pertinent, and I will continue to talk about it, about this matter. Many people do not know about it. There's a whole discourse on what's called the Galapagos effect, that Japan, having been isolated from foreign influence, developed in its own kind of insular, which, truth be told, it doth not even matter, because this whole talk is all of this talk about, it's isolated, they don't know anything. No, they know things, and they were trading with different Asian countries, because, truth be told, and other people already know this, they would not be able to survive without trade. And so, even if it is just trade simply with China, or other Asian countries like Korea, to whatever extent that trade was had, that is still cultural exchange. And Japan is not so very different from a lot of other different countries. Even in regard to China and its so-called isolation, they still had different countries that they engaged in trade with, not to mention the fact that all of these countries have differing social and differing ethnic and racial groups. It may not seem like it to many people, especially a great deal of people who are ignorant about the physiological differences of Asian peoples. They do not seem to really even notice the difference between a Korean or a Japanese person, or a Chinese person, or an Ainu and a Japanese person, or Yamato Japanese person, or the unique features of Okinawans. Many people do not take these matters into account. For the most part, they are talking about Western countries, for the most part, which, is interesting, but truth be told, there is still a certain degree of cultural acumen that those people have in Japan, or rather did have, even without. And everyone does to an extent, because there are different ethnic, cultural, and racial groups in just about every country that is big enough. So, in the end, regardless of how many excuses are made, it is still happening. Japan no longer isolates itself. And what it cometh down to, in my opinion, as far as I know, it cometh down to respect. This is what it really this is what really matters. This respect and cultural integrity. And this idea that some people have that they are superior to other ethnic and racial groups. Very interesting. Long after Japan reconnected with the rest of the world in 1853, the idea of a nation as racially distinct and homogeneous remained deeply ingrained, even though one seeth upon the streets of Japan people of Afro-American descent, Euro descent, all types of races walking down the streets. So people continue to talk about this, but it hath no basis. It doth not matter if Japanese conservative people even talk about it, because people can say that, oh, Japan is homogenous. People think it is homogenous. Well, that's obviously not true. So people should stop saying it, in my opinion. Or there should be intelligent people who say, that is not true. Japan is no longer, or never hath been, a homogeneous country, because there have always been different people in Japan, even if they have been persecuted and discriminated against to an utterly significant extent, to an altogether horrid extent. But very interesting. That manifested in its most extreme form during the country's imperial era, when the fascist government promoted a race-based and extremely racist official state ideology. This ended with Imperial Japan's defeat in World War II, but the underlying sense of Japan's identity as rooted in racial purity has to some degree remained, even though it is a fallacy. It truly is. It is quite the fallacy. In fact, Japan is home to various minorities, including Koreans, Brazilian Japanese, and small indigenous Ainu community. But however small it is, it showeth that there is no such thing as some sort of indigenous type of idea of Yamato Japanese, because there were different peoples there before this sort of Yamato Japanese race. Ainu people, Okinawan Japanese people, and all of that culture, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, influence the language, culture of the Yamato Japanese. Yamato Japanese took from Ainu culture, especially. They took from Ainu culture and Okinawan culture, and to some extent, Korean culture. So, for people to continue, oh, it's a homogeneous country, and it doth not matter if Japanese people say that, oh, Japan is a homogeneous country. Many of us should correct them. It is not a homogeneous country. It is so very annoying to see people parrot that talk. But most Japanese continue to think of themselves as ethnically unified, and the truth is they are not. They are not. As key to understanding why racism remains so pervasive in the country that otherwise seemeth so modern. Simply put, if the general consensus in Japan is that the country is largely homogeneous, it just doesn't need to have a big conversation about race. Issues that most other societies are forced to discuss can go totally ignored in Japan. Without that national conversation, lots of well-meaning people can end up holding ideas that have been widely rejected elsewhere. And truth be told, that nationalistic mindset doth not help them in any wise, considering their military has been entirely defanged, because they will never be in World War II shape. That country will never be in the position it was during World War II, when it had so much military might and power and had Asia at its knees. They never will be in that position again, because they got away with it once, or at least that nation had achieved that state of power in Asia at that time. China, North Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, none of these countries will let it happen again. They simply will not. They simply will not let that happen again. So that pride is just it is just a poison. It is just a poison that has really infected that country. And as the birth rate goes down every year and the suicide rate goes up every year, it is not a good state of affairs. This is exactly why people should not hold their tongues, and they should speak honestly about all of these matters. Race, culture, religion. Japanese people, for the most part, it would seem, do not like having those discussions. Japan's insider-outsider mentality can lend itself to crude stereotyping of foreigners, and that is just not just black people. Check out this ad for, I can't do it because my internet is down for the time being. Check out this ad for Japanese airline ANA, ANA, featuring actors in whiteface, complete with stick-on big noses. Interesting. The intent is not necessarily malicious. It always is malicious. This talk, it's not, no. These people should, and it is such a lack of insecurity that they cannot walk around in their own skin and feel comfortable. How ridiculous. They cannot do what American actors and actresses do and walk around without having these ridiculous gimmicks. They are so awkward. And that is Japanese social culture, and it should not be imitated. And Westerners or whoever goes there to work, if they have to do business there, they should not try to act nice and try to adopt that culture, because it is, if you try to act Japanese, if you really adopt their culture, you, in all likelihood, you will face the same consequences they do, which is basically getting in a situation where you look awkward and stupid, and then you get angry because you look awkward and stupid. The latter result cometh from the former decision to do something awkward and stupid looking, which, truth be told, Japanese people, a lot of them I have seen, individuals, they do not like to be corrected or called ignorant, but a lot of them are, and it doth not matter how good they claim that education system is, it obviously does not teach very much in the way of common sense, in my opinion. The other day I showed a video of these rats and star guys to a Japanese co-worker of mine, and without giving him any clue why I had made him watch it, I asked what he thought of it. "They want to be like black people," he said, grinning. "They love black people." Ridiculous. I mean, and that simply needeth to be corrected, because it is just utterly demeaning to any Afro-American individual, because the truth is they have an idea of an Afro-American or an Afro person as just some funny individual. Many Afro people say this, especially in Hollywood. They say the Euro-Americans are quite happy with you as long as you keep a big smile on your face. But once you get serious, then your reception really doth change. And that was the case for Dave Chappelle too, when he had said, they had said you can wear a dress for a particular movie, and he refused, and that did not go over so well. Maybe some of you know about that situation. The idea of appreciative blackface is one that has appeared again in Japan more recently. B-stylers, part of the small local hip-hop scene, are a niche youth subculture whose members seek to show their love of all things black, or the idea that blackness anyway, by trying to look black, tanning themselves as dark as possible. It would be akin to that thing in, I did not know how many of you have played Fallout New Vegas. You had a character called Ulysses, and you had a particular group of he was working. The people who've played Fallout New Vegas and have played the DLC will know what I'm talking about. For those of you who do not worry about it. You can get that as a repack game for free, honestly. If you know where to go. But anyhow, that's a whole nother subject. Anyhow, he used to wear his hair in dreadlocks. He used to work for Caesar. Those who played the game know. And basically Fallout is a post-apocalyptic game. You had this guy who was taking over different tribes, because the world had basically, people had to rebuild, and they congregated in different tribes. And this person named Caesar, he styled this little empire off of the Romans, and well, his real name wasn't Caesar, but anyhow, for those who've played the game will get the reference. Fallout fans, do you remember when Ulysses did not feel good about the fact that the Whitelegs had taken his custom of dreadlocks, and you see, and they start to commit murder and so forth, and you see, for him that was part of his culture, but his tribe had already been destroyed by Caesar, and you have the Whitelegs tribe joining Caesar and taking the custom of twisting their hair in dreadlocks. So Ulysses, to him, that really disgusted him. That is how a lot of Afro-Americans, I'm sure, do feel about seeing these Japanese individuals. And the sad thing is that, and I think that is the case for some individuals, however, it is still not something that is appropriate, and Afro people should tell Japanese people. A lot of these people do not like to be corrected, and I saw that in Yoko Ishii's video. She was against any reform to blackface in Japan. To her, it is very entertaining. So it is not a matter of innocence to her. It is this idea that this should be a type of practice that continues. They really like that, even though Afro people are saying that this is not good. They do not appreciate this. Okay. So groups like Rats and Star take what they imagine to be African American musical tradition, pump it up through a J-pop machine, and it comes out unrecognizable. They may dress in the style of a 1950s American doo-wop band, but they do not sound anything like one. Cleveland thinks of Japan's blackface singers and B-stylers in terms of exotic uttering. While the intent may be to show enthusiasm for something thought of as cool and different, the result can end up perpetuating racist stereotypes. And it is just as I had said during my Claymore video. I had said Japanese comedy is terrible because it is awkward. It is awkward. It is so very awkward and unoriginal, and whatever originality it has seemeth to be so very perplexing that one would think, oh goodness, it is so awkward. These people are just so... It is not good comedy, I will put it that way. I've seen Korean comedy. I've seen Chinese comedians. Far better. Japanese comedy is terrible in my opinion, but hey, I've expressed my opinion. I mean, I cannot say that they are objectively bad, but I can say subjectively, I do not think that they are that impressive. At least for me. They impressed me, but in the wrong way. I will put it that way. Cleveland stresses this is not in any way unique to Japan, but the key difference is that in America, for example, there are endless debates about it. There's awareness and constant self-policing. This country, of course, has its own enormous race issues to wrestle with, but those issues get talked about. In Japan, this doesn't happen, and it doth not. More now than it used to be. Goodness, this is a long article. Japan's racism puts the country's future at risk. From time to time, foreigners have led outcries over racial issues, such as McNeil with his anti-black petition, or 1980s U.S.-led campaign to ban the racist 1950s children's book Little Black Sambo, highly popular in Japan. It since has gone black on the shelves because it's that caricature. It's that idea of the dark-skinned savage, the dark-skinned barbarian, in my opinion, that has to be kept. Very interesting. Little Black Sambo, a book which they want the coon. They want the Sambo. They do not want real Afro people who speak their mind there. They want people who will bow their heads, nod, and take all of the nasty little innuendos and jokes that they do in Japan. People who do not complain about it, but people should continue. And the Koreans have been talking about this for a long time. They say, oh, Korean people are so emotional. Korean people continue to complain about how racist we are because so many Japanese people are just terribly racist. Frankly. Not to say that Koreans are not either. However, Korean people, for the most part, they have more social aptitude and social acumen than Japanese people by far, I would say. Not to say that Korean people do not have their own problems, but you see in cultures like Japan and Korea, in countries like Japan and Korea where people are worked so hard where they hardly get to socialize or do much else other than work, they really do not have many social. I think that has to do with that has sort of affected their awkwardness. I really do. Even the flood of anti-Korean hate speech, an issue that's much closer to home, given Japan's sizable Korean minority in its history. Think about that. Three big minority groups. Korean, and people can say the Ainu is small, but the Ainu blood is still mixed in over time with Yamato Japanese. So you cannot really be Yamato Japanese with Ainu Korean blood or the lesser Okinawan blood. So the whole idea, it's homogeneous, it's nationalistic. No, it really isn't. And its history of Korea has led the central government to respond not with legal measures, but with a suggestion that people be nicer to each other. Why all the inertia? It goes back to this powerful myth of Japan being an ethnically unified place. As the country's population ages and its birth rate drops, it's in badly need of immigrants. It needs some of that. These people, a lot of these Japanese people are infertile. The same thing is happening with Korea. And people may not think, we would never mix blood with Filipinos because the family wants their young man to come home with a Japanese woman. And if that man cometh home with a Filipino woman or some Chinese migrant woman who's nice and fertile and is not, especially those Vietnamese women, different culture. But a lot of those, especially Southeast Asian people, they are quite healthy. They are quite a great deal healthier than Japanese people and Korean people. A lot of these Japanese and Korean women, and Vietnamese people too, and really all Asians, sadly, are messing up their bodies with the skin whitening cream and these chemicals and other many things. They believe if they look as white as possible, they can get their men. They can get a man. And it is just so sad because they are destroying their health. But regardless, I would say that if I had to, and many people talk about it, they say, a Filipino woman, they look healthier, they look more beautiful than Japanese women and even Chinese women. So, but if a Japanese man would come home with a Filipino woman, I do not think it would go over well. Not to mention the fact that the whole idea of migrants, they make it very hard in Japan for migrants to come. So you have this whole nationalistic movement in Japan, and this whole prevailing culture of people who do not want people to come in the country. However, it is too late. It has already happened. There are already people in the country. There are already people who are still coming to the country, and a lot of their labor forces are migrant labor forces. Is a migrant labor force. So when people are talking, when people are engaging with each other, they will forget this idea of Yamato Japan. Oh, Yamato race. No. When a lot of these men are becoming hikikomori, and they won't even come out of their rooms. They won't even come out of the house. So I am sure some of those women will gladly take a Filipino man or whoever, and things over time, things will, in my opinion, I think it is an inevitability that things are going to gradually change in Japan. That is my opinion, because it simply cannot continue. The birth rate in Japan and Korea is so low that truly it is like a curse. So they're gonna need some of those darker skinned people from Southeast Asia, and they already work in Japan. A lot of those people do, but it is just as I say. For a traditional conservative Japanese family, they do not want their son or daughter to come home with a Vietnamese, Filipino, Chinese, or Korean person. And the relationships in Japan are very interesting. There is more sexual activity occurring in Japan than there ever has been, more pornography than there ever has been, but the birth rate goes down every year. These types of nasty sadomasochistic cultures, and sadomasochism is sadism and masochism are very popular in Japan. It is not conducive to having big families or families in general. It really corrupts the mind. It perverts the mind. In my opinion, that is what I have seen. Very interesting. Okay. So that notion of racial homogeneity and conformity can lead to a lack of acceptance and understanding, said Cleveland, and it feeds in an atmosphere in which understanding diversity is really not a priority, which is funny because there is diversity in the country, even if one were to abstract the country from all people from Europe and America and all of these other different places. There are still different ethnic and racial groups there. So the fact that they would even dare to claim that is a homogenous country is so ridiculous to read. It should be a priority. Japan's minorities face entrenched discrimination as the country's population ages and its birth rate drops. It's badly in need of migrants to fill labor shortages and keep the welfare state funded. But Japan's problem, and here's what they didn't dare to write, because it would probably make some particular Japanese people somewhat annoyed, but they also need some of those more fertile women from Southeast Asia and these other countries to come to Japan, frankly, and really bolster that birth rate and become citizens there in Japan. And I think that will happen eventually, or it won't. Or it could just be that Yamato Japanese race really goes down. Hopefully the Ainu will be building up their little communities. As, you know, I mean, which doth happen when, you know, even the Native American population here in the United States, people like to pretend, oh, Native Americans don't even exist anymore. They've all been destroyed. No. They have their communities. They have their business ventures. people may say, oh, that's such a small group of the population, they're not even really to be really considered. But no, Native Americans, they are survivors. Ainu people are survivors. Okinawan people are survivors. And people say, oh, they're so small, they're just such and such percentage of the population, but they're still there, they're still here. They most certainly are. They withstood European uncleanliness and all of that. And that whole idea of Europeans being so nasty that they cannot bathe themselves and wash themselves, that they actually became breeding grounds for disease. It was an unintended consequence that these diseased, unclean, nasty, dirty people came to the United States and were so dirty, they brought diseases Native Americans had not even dealt with. But very interesting. You have TikTok videos talking about these weird podcasts and clips of people of Euro-Americans at least, basically white people, saying they do not shower or bathe. I don't wash my legs. Crazy people. Oh my goodness, to see that become a trend on YouTube or TikTok or wherever, all on these social media platforms, people saying they're becoming closer to nature. They're going to bring all of these nasty diseases back and new ones by doing this and basically repeat history. Oh, I only wash like such and, like once a week or something. Oh my goodness. You have men and women saying this, and oh my goodness, wow, how incredible. But that is a whole different subject, people. It makes my skin crawl even thinking about it. Oh my goodness. And this is supposed to be the majority? Oh, how terrible. But I will not speak for Europeans because, I mean, the videos that have become really popular are Euro-Americans saying they do not bathe. Very often, you have people saying they do not wash their hands. And I think, oh my goodness, how terrible. And I myself, I do not always use soap, but I at least use water. Alright? I at least use water. I always wash my hands. You have people, oh my goodness, it is just absolutely strange. And there's, what weird alternative cultures are being promoted that make absolutely no sense in my opinion. But anyhow, let me continue to read. In February, a former advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sparked international outrage by suggesting apartheid could provide a good model for keeping immigrant workers separate from the Japanese. This is not a political climate that is ready to attract migrants that Japan need of, much less assimilate them into society. And the interesting thing to consider is that South Africa fell too. And eventually that idea of apartheid did not work in South Africa. And Japan's Yamato-blooded population is really just dying. It is not going to be able to replace itself. They need to breed. They need to have children. The problem is you have hikikomori. You have people being worked to death. You have individuals who feel as though they have no reason to live. Suicide. You have a low birth rate. So it really is terrible. So migration, truth be told, what is the use of having a country, of having this island? Oh, if Yamato Japanese people cannot inhabit it, then no one will. No. They will just fall. And they imagine people, if you will, if Japan had to muster an army to fight a war and they could not have American support. And they just had to use their resources and their people to fight it. Let's say they had the weapons and and different, let's say they had the weapons from the United States, but for whatever reason the United States could not aid them sufficiently. And let us say tomorrow or at a moment's notice they had to fight China or North Korea or one of these countries. Where will they find their men? A lot of them are addicted to porn, anime, hentai. Alright? That is not a fighting nation. They did not have enough young men. They did not have the birth rate to sustain a draft, a mobilization of their military. They simply do not. Because when you have a population aging that much, they will not be able to fight a war. So they need migrants. They need a whole good deal of foreign blood and foreign fertility, because their country, their native people, they aren't going to be able to do it. You already have nurses from the Philippines and Vietnam, because there are not enough Japanese nurses to take care of their growing population of older people. Interesting. So we have the education would be a good place to start. Okay, so he says Japan needs a more vibrant civil society that is politically democratic, that allows for diversity and cultivates difference. He suggested encouraging language learning and lessons about foreign cultures will help. I do not think, for the most part, Japanese education promotes an understanding of racial diversity, racial inequality, and various aspects of racial exploitation, he told me. Japan is a globalized society, he said, but sometimes it is very tone deaf. Very interesting article. I do not agree with everything in it, because I think they do not know very much about Shinto nationalism, which is something I talk about a great deal. We will be talking about this subject and many others having to do with Japanese culture, lesser known aspects of it, at some point. May the Lord bless you, and farewell.